bandidos, they'd come in on horseback, and they would go into towns or stores and so on, and just kill people and take whatever they could and leave.
Podcast, we have an absolute legend and somebody who's been a mentor and a hero of mine in many ways, and that is Winston Moore. Anybody who's from the Boise, Idaho or Treasure Valley area is going to know that name because he is a prolific real estate developer. Winston is just an absolute inspiration of a human. He's 101 years old and he still drives to the office every day in his black Mercedes and is just an inspiration. You know, the guy has been fishing all over the world. He has world records. He's been in competitions for most of his life with bird hunting and training bird dogs, just anything you can imagine outdoors. He used to own a lumber company in Los Angeles. Yes, you heard that correctly, a lumber mill in Los Angeles, where he grew up in the 1920s and 30s. The guy's lived about 10 lifetimes in one, and we covered a broad array of topics, you know, from hunting and fishing and camping and adventure and his background, owning a company called Kamloops Distribution, which was a wholesale outdoor supply and sportswear company that he ran for decades before he got into real estate development. And Winston is just a wealth of knowledge. He's got a million stories, and I know you guys are going to enjoy this interview as much as I did. So without further ado, I give you Winston Moore. Why still come to the office every day at 101?
Why do I?
Yeah, why still come to the office?
I just enjoy it. I just love, you know, we, over my career, if you want to call it that, in real estate development, we've built just over 100 buildings for ourselves. We're not general contractors. Mm-hmm. We build buildings and lease them and hold them and then sell them later on. Over 100 buildings, about 3 million square feet, and we've been pretty busy.
How long have you been doing real estate development, Winston?
Since 1979 is when we started what is now BODO. It used to be called 8th Street Marketplace when I did that. It's kind of a long story, but I had, prior to real estate, I had a wholesale sporting goods company. And it grew and grew and grew until we were the second largest wholesaler of sporting goods in the Pacific Northwest. And I kept running out of room. Mm-hmm. And the only inexpensive buildings I could find were down on 8th Street, and Idaho Hardware and Plumbing was down there. They'd been there forever, and they were closing. So I bought that building and moved my inventory, which wasn't much yet, but not as much as we needed. And it just kept growing. I had, I don't know if the name Skaggs means anything to you.
I know that name.
Skaggs Drug turned out to be one of the largest in the country. And I'm back up all over the place.
That's okay.
I used to run Chesapeake Bay retrievers in field trials. I had 6 of them. And at one of the trials, I met a cardiologist from Salt Lake. His name was Wes Peltzer. And he wanted a Chesapeake. And so I arranged for him to have a puppy. And I got to know Dr. Peltzer pretty well. And he loved to hunt ducks. He belonged to the New State Gun Club on the Great Salt Lake, which is where all the millionaires hunted ducks. Well, I had duck hunting up here that was beyond imagination. I was telling him about that one day at a field trial. He said, God, could I ever come up and hunt with you? And I said, yeah, sure. But I said, there's one caveat, is you come alone. You don't bring anybody with you, because I don't hunt with a bunch of people. And he said, fine. And so he called me a few days before he was supposed to come up in November. He called me and he was all excited. God, what does it look like? And I said, well, it's just great, Wes. The northern birds are starting to come down now. You're going to have duck hunting like you never could imagine. And he said, great. He said, I have a favor to ask of you. And I said, what is that? He said, I want to bring a friend. And I said, Wes, we already had this conversation. You know what the answer is. It's no, and that's all there is to it. And he kept after me, and he was almost in tears on the telephone. And he said, could you possibly make an exception? I said, why? I told you. He said, well, I've already invited my closest friend, my dearest friend. And I said, who the hell is that? And he said, Sam Skaggs. And I thought he was going to, commit suicide. I said, okay, I'll make an exception this one time.
Jeez. He was that upset, huh?
But never again.
Never again.
No. And so we hung up, and I got to thinking about it. I said, what's this thing called quid pro quo? Something for something. Here I'm doing Sam Skaggs a real favor by taking it to my duck hunting spot.
Yep.
And Sam Skaggs stores buy a lot of sporting goods.
Yep.
And they're not buying any of it from my wholesale company, which was Kamloops Distributing. So I called Wes Peltzer back and explained to him. And I said, I think it'd just be fair if your friend Skaggs would at least consider doing some business with me. The next morning, my wife, who sat up on a little veranda answering the phone, said, Sam Skaggs is on the phone. I said, really? Yeah. Morning, Sam. Nice to hear from you. He said, well, I'm really excited about coming up there. Duck hunting's one of my favorite things. And he said, I understand that you're in the wholesale sporting goods business. I said, yeah, I really am. That's right. I also understand you might like to do some business with my company. And I said, well, that's kind of an understatement. He said, okay, tomorrow morning you will hear from a fellow by the name of Ted Austin. Now, this is 40 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. And Ted is my merchandise manager. He coordinates all of the buying for all of our stores. He said, I think you'll find Ted to be pretty cooperative. Well, to shorten it up, I did get the call from Ted Austin. And he invited me to come down and make a presentation to their store managers, which I did. And they couldn't imagine that this little guy from Boise, Idaho, is big enough to handle a Skaggs business. Mm-hmm. So I reassured him. Anyway, that was the beginning of what was for me a very fortuitous part of my life. And I got to know Sam Skaggs really well. He and I became close friends. He was my home for dinner, and he used to invite me down to Salt Lake, which is their headquarters, to sit on some meetings. And I took such good care of their store. See, a chain as big as Skaggs, their managers don't know anything about fishing, 90% of them. Mm-hmm. They don't know what to buy. Mm-hmm. But they've got a department. fill it up, make all kinds of terrible decisions and so on. And I made Skaggs a lot of money through seeing that their stores all had what they should have in the way of fishing tackle for that season. And I did a great job, and Skaggs understood that and appreciated it. And see, I started Kamloops, my wholesale company, from just about nothing. That's another long story, but so we didn't have much volume.
Winston,
Now with the Skaggs business, I've got plenty of volume, and I can go to the manufacturers and really deal with them and get some good cost concessions because I've got all this volume. But I don't know how long you want me to go on.
Well, here's what I want to draw out of this. I think, could you give people an idea of where Kamloops was in terms of size before the Skaggs, and then what happened to it after?
Well, backing up then, I came to Boise from Southern California in 1957, and I had been in the lumber business in a small way in Los Angeles. So I'd heard about the duck shooting and the pheasant hunting in the Boise Valley. I came up here one season and tried it, and I told Diane, my darling wife, that we're going to move to Boise, and she was fine, whatever I wanted to do. And I figured that I would somehow get into the lumber business here because that's what I was doing in Los Angeles. But I discovered and found that a company called Boise Payette Lumber Company had a lumber yard in every little town and village in Idaho. There was no room for another one. So now what do? A real estate broker came to me and told me about a sporting goods store that was for sale. And being an outdoorsman, which is a huge part of my life, having a sporting goods store sounded fine. So it all worked out, but I bought it. It was a huge mistake. I could not begin to compete with the larger, well-financed retailers.
Who were you competing with at that time? Who were you competing with at that time?
Statewide, Patriasco, Kmart, Penny, all of them. And I couldn't compete with them because they were big enough. They were buying direct, and I was buying from wholesalers.
Yeah.
I wasn't big enough in volume to go direct. Well, now with the Skaggs business, I can do that, but what I found that most of Skaggs stores were in the mountain states. And in the mountain states in the winter, people aren't fishing very much, so there's nothing to sell, and I got to figure out how in the world can I correct that. Well, backing up a little bit, a fellow who turned out to be a real friend of mine was Harry Daum, D-A-U-M. He was a shopping center developer in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and Alaska. And he was determined that he was going to build a mall, our first mall, what turned out to be Boise Town Square in Boise. And I got to know Harry really well, and he bought a farm over near Parma and had some good duck shooting on it, and he invited me to come over, and I said, Harry, I got my own duck. Well, he said, I've got somebody I want you to meet. Would you come just this one time? So I went over, and he introduced me to a fellow by the name of Peyton Haas, Haus, who was the chairman of the board of Payless Northwest, which was a huge chain of drugstores from Northern California up into Washington, all along the coast. And those stores had fishing tackle year round.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, God, so I called Pete. Oh, I met him. I don't know if I already said this. I went out to shoot ducks at Harry's place. Had coffee with Peyton Hawes. Didn't think about business. But later on, I was starting to say, I thought, God, I just wonder if I could ever do any business with Payless. So I thought, what the heck, I'll try. I called for Peyton Hawes, and I didn't think he'd even take my call. And he did, and I said, you know, good morning, Peyton. This is Winston Moore. You probably don't. Oh, of course I remember you. We had a good shoot, you with Harry and I. He said, what can I do for you this morning? And I explained to him that I was in the wholesale business and so on. And he said, Winston, you couldn't call it at a more opportune time. He said, for some reason, all my managers have decided that we need to change our supplier of sporting goods. We're doing business with an outfit called All Sports in Portland. They've been taking care of us, and I don't know what happened, but my managers are insisting we get another supplier. So if you'd like to come down, we're having a managers meeting, next week. So why don't you come down and make a presentation? So I did. I flew down and go into this room. There's about, I think, over 100 people. They're managers and store managers, and and here's this guy from Boise, Idaho, who thinks he can take care of anybody this size. And so I explained to them that I was doing really well with Skaggs. They were pleased, and that kind of got their attention. I made my pitch and flew back home. The president of Payless was Ed Hart. Peyton Hawes was chairman. And I'd been home a couple of days, and Ed Hart calls me and said, Winston, you made a good presentation. You impressed our guys. We'd like to give you a try. So that was the beginning. Now I've got Skaggs, which is huge. I've got Payless, which is huge. I've got year-round business. Mm-hmm. And we also lined up J.C. Penney and Kmart and Butriosco and some others. So that, one thing led to another, and I just had, and that's, I don't know where we were here in this conversation, but that's what prompted me. I had no room in the basement of this little retail store.
Right.
So that's why I bought Idaho Hardware and Plumbing. Mm-hmm. That was 20,000 feet. I thought, my God, what will I do with all that? Well, 6 months later, I'm out of space. So I bought the next building to it, which was twice the size, from Albertsons. It was what they called their, I don't know what they called it, but it was right next to Idaho Hardware. And I kept buying those old buildings because I kept running out of space. I was bringing in carloads of life jackets, mm-hmm. carloads of ammunition. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get it in fast enough. But operating out of those old buildings, there's no way you could be efficient. Mm-hmm. There's black widows, spiders, and rats, and mice, and cobwebs. We couldn't find our inventory half the time. So I built a 65,000-foot warehouse. It's still there in Boise. And moved all the inventory from those old buildings into the new warehouse. Now I've got all these old buildings. I mean, on both sides of 8th Street, mm-hmm. Idaho Hardware and Plumbing, the big Albertsons thing, a couple of drug companies. What in the hell am I going to do with them? I don't know. But being a good husband, I took my wife, Diane, to San Francisco to the ballet. Mm-hmm. And we visited Ghirardelli Square, and Fisherman's Wharf, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And those were old buildings mm-hmm. that had been rehabbed into retail, and they were really successful. Mm-hmm. And I thought, God, I just wonder if that would possibly work in Boise. So I undertook what I still believe was the riskiest commercial real estate development in the history of man. I had no pre-leasing. Nobody believed I could do it. And it was my only bank at the time, Idaho First National, believed in me. And so I was able to finance it and do it. And the timing was just right. Bob Hansberger and John Ferry and the movers and shakers were determined to have Boise's mall in downtown Boise. And and Harry Dahm, the developer from San Francisco, put the chief executives of 3 or 4 or 5 major retailers, Penny and all the big ones that he did business with in other areas in his shopping centers. They put them in his airplane, each with a map and some red pins. They flew the whole valley, and he asked them to put a red pin where they think the mall should go. They each put it in the same spot, which is where the mall ultimately went. Well, based on that, Harry then started optioning all the land on the north side of Franklin, on the north side of the tracks, hundreds and hundreds of acres, which is where he was going to put the mall. But the mayor and other movers and shakers fought him every step of the way because they wanted it downtown, which it never could have happened downtown. And Harry had all these options. He was reserving this land because he was determined that's where the mall was gonna be. And because the wheels of Boise didn't want it, where it ultimately turned out to be where Harry had it, they just fought him every step of the way. And it actually put Harry into bankruptcy because these options all had to be serviced. Every year if you wanted to renew them, you had to come up with a bunch of money. And he actually lost everything he had except one mall in Anchorage, Alaska.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And yeah, he did. I knew him really well. Then John Price from Salt Lake, who was a major developer, found out what was going on, and he actually built the mall. And I don't remember what your question was.
That's okay.
Where was Kamloops?
Well, Winston, when you did the 8th Street development, you still owned Kamloops, right? You hadn't sold it yet.
No.
Or had you already sold it?
Yeah.
Why? Talk a little bit about why you got out of that business. Why you sold it?
My wife Diane and I had just walked into our house after a fishing trip in Panama. I'll never forget it. And the phone was ringing. I figure it was the kid saying welcome home or something. And I pick it up. He says, do I have the right number? I'm looking for Winston Moore. And I said, yeah, this is Winston. He said, Mr. Moore, my name is Peter Fawcett, and I'm with the Atlanta LaSalle Corporation. And by way of introduction, we own the Atlanta Braves Ball Club. And we've heard about your company and we'd like to buy it. And I said, oh, Foley. I didn't say, his name was Peter Foley. I said, oh, Mr. Foley, it's not for sale. I have no reason to sell it. And he said, are you sure? And I said, I'm positive. And he said, well, I'm going to be in Boise next week. Could I at least stop in and say hello? And I said, of course. So told me when he was going to be here, and I got a hold of my warehouse manager and said, Rich Foley is coming in tomorrow or whenever it was. And I said, he's in the insurance business. I didn't want him to think I was talking to somebody about selling.
Yeah.
And he needs to see what they're insuring. So when he comes in, you give him a tour of the facility and so on. So he showed up, and Rich took him all through all those old buildings. And I thought the guy would be no change. He said, boy, you've got quite an operation. Well, to shorten it down a little bit, they kept after me and after me and after me and made me offer after offer after offer until it was finally what I called the Godfather deal. You couldn't turn it down. And what they were doing, they had also purchased 2 other wholesalers. They wanted to establish a few major wholesalers in the country so they could supply the whole country. And they wanted me to help them finish doing that. And so kind of the bottom line there is I sold it, and in hindsight, I'm glad I did. They paid me an awful lot of money for it, and they asked me to stay on for 3 or 4 years and help them acquire these other companies, which I did. But as time passed, these Atlanta LaSalle were mostly young guys, calling them whiz kids. And they gradually felt that they knew more about running a wholesale company than the owner, manager, sellers of these that we were buying. And these guys were all the cream of the crop. I mean, they were all entrepreneurs. They were on the job every day. They knew all their inventory. They knew exactly what was going on, which is why I wanted them to Atlanta to buy them. I forget where I was going with that now. But they finally got to the point where I was supposed to be taking care of buying all these companies and being sure what we were buying and so on. And they gradually just were taking away that authority, and so I left them. And I've got all that money that they paid me for Kamloops, and I think I know you know Larry Leisure.
Oh yeah.
He was a pal of mine, still is. And he said, what are you going to do with all that money, all that cash? I said, I really don't know, Larry. He said, well, I've got 10 acres. I said, I'm 99% sure I know where the mall is going. And he said, I've got 10 acres for sale right in that area. Why don't you buy it and hang on to it? So I bought it. I didn't know what I was doing. I bought it. And then I bought another 10 and another 15, I think it was. And it dawns on me, well, what am I doing? I'm the only one buying land out here, and I don't have any use for it. And then the light bulb came on, which should have been obvious, that if you have well-located land, you put the right buildings on it, get those buildings leased, you've got a real, not only do you have cash flow, but you've got a real marketable asset. And I ended up buying 200 or 300 acres out on the west side, not where the mall is, but very close to it. And
Winston, were you buying all this acreage at the same time you were doing 8th Street, or before or after?
No, I'd already sold 8th Street Marketplace.
Okay, yeah. Because that was your first development.
Yeah.
Which is wild. You picked a hard one to start on.
Crazy. It was, if I knew then 5% of what I know now, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
It was too risky.
Right.
But the bank believed in me, and almost more than I did. And so
I was talking.
We've got all this land, and I just kept building buildings. We were right in the pathway of growth.
Yep.
And it's, Emerald, the west end of Emerald Street used to be at Cole Road. And the land that I bought was west of that. All, dairies and sugar beets and so on. And I arranged with Ada County Highway District through what they call an LID, Local Improvement District bond, to extend Emerald from Cole Road to Maple Grove, just west of Maple Grove. And then that opened up all my land. Mm-hmm. And most of those streets out there, I'm a fisherman lunatic,
oh, yeah.
are named, there's one of them right there.
Sailfish, yeah, absolutely.
They're all named Golden Trout Avenue and
yeah.
Tarpon Drive and so on. And almost as fast as we could build buildings out there, we could lease them.
Let me ask you this, what did you enjoy doing more, running Kamloops or developing real estate?
I think developing real estate. Developing real estate is not easy, but if you maybe have a little bit of smarts and have the land, you can't do much without land. I had when I had Kamloops, I don't know if I said earlier in this conversation, but in order to take good care of skags and pay less, I had to give them, almost overnight delivery, which could not be done out of Boise, some of it.
Yep.
So I built that warehouse here. See where I'm going with this now.
Overnight delivery.
And then I built one in Helena, Montana, in Salt Lake City, in Vancouver, Washington. And with those, they were all located so I could make almost overnight or at least second day delivery, and I could take care of all these huge accounts, which everybody in the world wanted to see that I failed at that.
You were Amazon before Amazon was Amazon. Overnight delivery.
Yeah. Bezos is not my middle name.
Oh man! So one of the things I want to talk to you about, Winston, is your development model with real estate. You like to keep things simple in terms of the partners you bring in or don't bring in, the banks you worked with, the contractors you work with. Talk a little bit about that, about long-term relationships and keeping things simple.
There's 3 or 4 things there.
Yeah.
One is the who we work with to build all these buildings. The Russell Corporation, Neil Russell. I met them through a friend of mine. I met Neil Russell when we were just getting ready to start what turned out to be 8th Street Marketplace, BODO. And he did just a great job, and every builder in town was after me for my business, but I had no reason to not work with Neil. These guys tell me, they could save me 15, 20%. There's no way they could do that because they were just, probably still are today, just a handful of subcontractors, drywall people, roofing, plumbing, electrical, who were quality professionals and produce on time. And Russell, that's who Russell was working with. And these other guys, if they work with them, the same subs, there's no way they could come in lower than Russell. So they were working with subs. So anyway, Neil did this as a great job. Never let me down. And I don't know if I said it earlier or not, but we built over 100 buildings, 3 million square feet. So what was the other part of your question?
Just your business model in terms of keeping things simple with the banks you worked with, the partners you worked with, the builder you work with, managing your own properties.
The banks turned out to be interesting. When I came here from Southern California, I didn't have any money. I had a small interest in a lumber yard down there, as I think I mentioned earlier. That wouldn't work here, but Idaho First Nation. Oh, when I had the lumber yard, we were doing business with I don't remember the name of the bank in Los Angeles, but the manager was a guy by the name of Roy Mays. And so when I decided to come up here, I didn't just want to disappear. I wanted to thank Roy for the way he took care of that lumber yard. So I went to see him and told him what was going on. He said, well, how about I write a letter of introduction to our correspondent bank up there? I said, fine, which was Idaho First National, which later became West One, which later became U.S. Bank, still is. So I bought, I still live in the same place today since 1957, different house. I bought an old farmhouse, but it was on 13 acres of land where I could train my dogs and so on. And we were from Southern California. And we used to have winters here. I don't know how long you've been here, but we used to have real winters. And I remember my family and I, 2 little guys, and my wife and I were sitting in the living room of this old house, had kind of a bay window, just watching the snow, just coming down, these huge flakes. God, it's just exciting. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, you have to cross a bridge to get to my place. Here comes a big black Cadillac. There was no pavement up there. It was all mud. This guy's trying to stay on the road. And what the hell is this?
Yeah.
I figured he'd go right by. He pulled into my driveway, pulled into the front of his window. And a guy gets out with a big black overcoat, black hat, black scarf. I thought, God, who didn't I pay?
That's what I was thinking.
This looks like Guido.
Yeah.
Anyway, I let him in, and he said, Mr. Moore, my name is Marshall Shields, and I'm one of the vice presidents at First National, and we'd sure like to have your business. I wonder if you'd consider coming in and talk to one of my loan officers. I said, well, sure. So I did. I went down there, and I'll never forget it. The loan officer's name was Eugene Reed. And I walked out of that bank with an unsecured line of credit for $7,500.
Wow.
I thought, man, I've arrived. I really arrived.
And they came to you.
yeah, for 75. Well, that's, they couldn't justify any. More than that, I didn't have anything. Well, I'm jumping around a little bit, but our volume became such. I was concerned that something might happen to Idaho First, which it did, because banks were changing ownership, changing credit policies, and so on. So I, over a period of probably 2 years, started doing business with 3 or 4 other banks. And at one time, I had unsecured lines of credit with 5 banks, 3 of them over 10 million each, and 2 of them over 5 million. And which today you couldn't do that. Unsecured is almost unheard of. And I thought that I owed it to those banks that they knew exactly what I was doing, what was going on. So every year when Jeffrey, my son, would finish a financial statement, I would bring the head of the banks in, the president and so on, but just one at a time. I'd bring in the president, vice president, whoever else they wanted. And I'd give them a copy of our financial statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go over it with them line by line by line item. So they knew when they walked out of that room, they knew exactly what our debt was with our suppliers, which buildings are under construction. They knew everything we were doing. And then I'd bring the next bank in. So they felt comfortable with that, and we maintained that relationship way on down the road.
Winston, I imagine you had years where that was not a comfortable review, where things were tight. I mean, you're not always flush if you're a real estate developer. I imagine there was times where you were reviewing your financials at the banks that they had questions.
The bank?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. My cash flow, I mean, I was okay in the big picture. My cash flow, Sam Skaggs' company, big company, used to pay me once a month, tenth of the month, as did Payless. But I was paying the suppliers more often than that,
Yep.
or trying to. And there was a time when I knew every credit manager of every manufacturer of sporting goods in the United States on a first-name basis, because I was on their list.
Right.
You know, and I wasn't paying them on time. I was paying them. But then I got to thinking, I'm one name. They've got a list that long, probably. But I found that, which is common sense, that if you don't BS them, if you can't do what they'd like you to do, tell them what you can do and then do it. And, if I told a credit manager I'd pay them $20,000 the first of the month and I couldn't do it, I'd call them. I wouldn't wait for them to call me. And so I got along with them fine. And then, one thing led to another. Pretty soon we've got all this credit. And the manufacturers of fishing tackle and camping goods and knew of my volume. And so they were anxious to sell to us. And in that business, Nick, you can't make any money, show a profit, by dealing only in ammunition, which everybody is a loss leader. And the Mitchell 300 reel that Garcia imported was the reel, and they were the loss leaders for these big chain stores that I dealt with. So I had to figure out some way. I mean, there's no profit there to have an exorbitant profit here. And the factories knew of my volume. And I can remember Zebco, which is a manufacturer of rods and reels, called me one day. And they had 7,500 pre-packaged rod and reel inline set shrink packed, really nice looking, $24.95 retail. And they offered them to me at $7.50. And I bought them for $5. Now I've got a $5 cost in this, pre-packaged $24.95. I can sell it to Skaggs so they can sell almost half of what is prepackaged. Yep. They're making plenty of money. I'm making plenty of money. I used to go to if I'm going off on a track, you just interrupt me. I used to go, there were a couple of fellows in Los Angeles who sold or manufactured fishing rods. And I got to know them pretty well. And they would call me at the end of their season And I'd go down there and I'd buy rods, beautiful rods, no labels on them, for some of them for $3 or $4. And then I developed a series of private labels. I had Northwoods, Kamloops, Western Waters, and one other. I'd bring these thousands of these beautiful rods to my warehouse at very little cost. And then I had a separate room where I had a gal in there. She'd know which labels to put on which rods. So I could go to Skaggs and say, okay, Northwoods is yours. It's a beautiful rod. Nobody else is going to have it. And I could go to Payless and say, Western Waters is yours. They loved that. And of course I was making, that's this part to offset this part.
Winston, one of the things I want to make sure we talk about, if we can shift gears a little bit, I want you to tell people what Los Angeles was like 80 years ago, 90 years ago, because people have no idea based on what they see today. Tell us about the Los Angeles you grew up in.
Well, I did grow up there. I was born there in 1924. And I've always been an outdoorsman. I loved hunting, fishing, dogs, and horses. And my dad, outside of being an alcoholic, was also a fisherman. And he used to take me to a place called Golden Trout Camp, which was on the east slope of the High Sierras. And the only way you get to Golden Trout Camp was on horseback. You lead a mule behind you with your suitcases and equipment and so on. And he took me up there the first time when I was 4 years old, on the front, riding in the saddle with him on the front of it.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with the outdoors. I'll get to your question in a second. And the people who owned Golden Trout Camp were Clara and Clarence Towler. They had no children. And they took a liking to me. And I don't know, maybe when I was 10 or something like that, they asked me if I'd like to come back next year and work for them all summer long. And of course I jumped at the chance, and that's where the love for the outdoors really was ingrained in me. But Los Angeles and the suburbs, I was actually living in Glendale when I moved up here. It was just becoming so crowded. I'll tell you, I'd always wanted a Cadillac. And I was finally able to afford a Cadillac. And in those days, there was no television. And what a lot of people did is after dinner, they'd put the kids in the car and just go for a ride. Just go for a different neighborhood and see what's going on. And I finally got the Cadillac, put the kids in the back seat, Diane and I in the front, and we were cruising along, going wherever the hell I was going. And the kids were both coughing, and they wouldn't stop. So I found a place to pull off of the highway, and I turned around and looked at my little guys, and both of them had black tears rolling. The smog was so bad, it was coming through the air conditioning vents.
Wow.
And I looked at Diane and I said, sweetheart, what are we waiting for? We're going to leave this area for the kids' sake. Mine too, but for the kids' sake. And she'd do anything I thought we might do. So Los Angeles was just, for me, loving the outdoors was just horrible.
But growing up there, you would go, tell us about hunting in Mexico. I want to hear, I got to get some of these stories. Hunting in Mexico and running around with bandidos down there. And tell us about that.
My dad, who ultimately was a terrible alcoholic. It's a whole other story. But he was the second senior person at a company called Brunswick Drug Company, which were the second largest wholesaler of pharmaceuticals in the world, right next to McKesson Robbins. And they did a lot of business with a big drugstore in El Centro, California, which is in the Imperial Valley, close to the Mexican border. His name was Massey Horton, how I remember this stuff. And Massey used to hunt ducks across the border in Mexico, and he invited my dad to go with him, and he did, and then I ended up going with him. And year after year after year. And there was a restaurant in Mexicali, the Mexico-United States border, Mexicali on one side, Calexico on the other side. And in Mexicali, there was a restaurant called León de Oro, which means Golden Lion. And they year-round served ducks and geese and quail and dove. They had access to all that somehow. And so I started going down there with my dad and Massey. And
how old were you?
I think somewhere between 10 and 12 when I first started going.
Mm-hmm.
And it was for what I liked, which it was duck hunting primarily, it was just terrific. And but then when I saw the kids with the tears, we decided to move here. But I still kept going to Mexico. I had a 3/4-ton Chevrolet pickup truck. And in those days, you couldn't buy campers to put on the back. So my hunting partner, a guy named Buck Banna, who was really handy, and he built one for that. But every year where we hunted down there was nothing around for miles. It was just desert and a few lagoons and stuff. And every year, guys would heard about the hunting. They'd go down there in a passenger car. This is the truth. And get stuck and die. Mm-hmm. They couldn't walk to a farm to borrow a tractor.
Yeah.
They were miles and miles and miles away. Obviously, I didn't want that to happen. So I've got this 3/4-ton pickup. In my lumber yard, we used to buy Mack trucks, and they all had front-wheel, 4-wheel drive. So I got a hold of a salesman and said, I've got this 3/4-ton. Is there any way in the world your mechanics could put front-wheel drive in it for me? Well, the short story is they did. I had the first civilian 4-wheel drive pickup truck in the United States. So that was one way not to get stuck,
right?
But you're going to get stuck anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So I bought a Jeep, a universal Jeep. Oh, and I had a winch on both of these rigs, on the front of the Jeep, on the front of the pickup. And I found a 4-wheel drive shop, and we put 8 wheels on that Jeep. I had duals all the way around. And then I had a tilt trailer built where, the pickup, back of the pickup, we drive the Jeep up and it goes down. You
pin it,
chain it down,
chain it. Yeah.
And every Thursday, from the middle of August, every other Thursday through the middle of August, through about April, Buck would show up at my house with his dog and his stuff, and we load up everything and head for the border. Looked like the pickup and trailer behind.
Looked like an invasion.
Jeep on it, yeah. And I made an arrangement with a service station fairly close to the border where I could leave my trailer. And then from there, Buck would drive the Jeep, I'd drive the pickup, and we'd go on down into Mexico. And I mentioned the Leon de Oro. Jimmy Alvarez was the owner. Big, fat, happy-go-lucky Mexican. He kind of liked me when I was a kid. And he and I got to be pals. And there were 2 or 3 years in a row, and for some reason, Mexico would not allow foreigners to hunt down there. But Jimmy was so, you'd go into that restaurant, Leon de Oro. On one side of the partition wall is the restaurant, oilcloth and everything. And you used to have celebrities from Hollywood come down there just for the ambiance. I remember Robert Taylor used to be there a lot, Clark Gable and so on. The other side was the bar, and it had a trough running around. You know, you're sitting at the bar, and your feet are on the edge of this trough, which is running water, which is where the guys would throw their cigars, spit, throw up, whatever. Really, I'm not kidding.
I believe you.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
But it had a number of tables in there, not for dining. And every one of them were playing dominoes, and they were filled with the chief of police and the majors in the army, you know, all the government people were right there, and Jimmy knew every one of them. So that those 2 or 3 years that they weren't issuing any permits to hunt down there, I was still able to get permits, which was, you know, it's not a big deal, but it was for me.
Mm-hmm.
And but back to California, it was just, for me who loved the outdoors, particularly my growing up, those summers at Golden Trout Camp. You know, I'd always, this goes way back. I'm 101 years old. I was 10 years old probably when I started up there. And I'd always wanted to be a cowboy with a big belly to where I couldn't see my belt buckle. That's the way those guys all were. That's how far back it goes. Mm-hmm. But those were great days.
Tell me about you had some run-ins with some of those bandidos when you were out hunting.
Yeah, I sure did. The Yaqui Indians were still active down there on the warpath. This goes, you know, way back into the
40s, 30s?
Probably the 30s,
yeah,
early 40s, and the bandidos. And these bandidos, they'd come in on horseback, and they got their cartridge things in their revolvers, and usually a rifle in the scabbard. And they would go into towns or stores and so on, and just kill people and take whatever they couldn't leave. I mean, really, they just go in and massacre them and get on their horse and go. And Buck Banta and I are sitting way down in the boondocks again one evening after hunting in a folding chair pretty close to the truck with our shotguns standing right next to us. And one evening we're just having a beer or something, and in ride these 3 bandidos. I mean, I can't describe them. I can't do justice and try, but they look as mean and rotten as they were. And again, they're used to going in and killing and doing whatever they had and getting the hell out and go on the next journey. And here come 3 of them in this. And these days, I spoke Spanish literally as well as I spoke English. Mm-hmm. I studied all through school, and I lived down there off and on with people who didn't speak any English. So here are these 3 guys, they ride in, their horses are huffing and puffing. They're probably, about from here to that wall. And they're trying to figure out, they haven't encountered this before. You know, people that they kill are helpless.
Yep.
And so I said to them in Spanish, I said, look, I know why you're here. I know what you think you're going to do, but here's something to think about. If you do what you're thinking about doing, one of you will not leave here alive. I mean, two of you will not leave here alive.
Mm-hmm.
And probably none of you will, because we know how to use these shotguns. And you better give it a lot of thought, because all I got to do is pick up this gun, and you're dead before you can shoot me. And they're, talking back and forth in Spanish, and I repeated that 2 or 3 times, and I finally picked up my gun, not in a threatening way, but I just kind of laid it in my lap where I could get my hands on it. Buck did the same thing. And finally they just turned around and rode away. And they were there just to massacre us.
Mm-hmm. I bet you guys were looking in the rearview mirror all the way back across the border, coming back on that trip. I bet you were looking over your shoulder the rest of that trip.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy introduced me to the guy that provided his restaurant with wild game year-round. His name was Jesus Pujol, P-U-J-O-L. I called him Joe. And I got to know him, and I hired him as kind of a guide, because he was out every day making a living shooting ducks and stuff. And then he had 2 restaurants in San Francisco that he called them when he had a load. They'd fly down, pick them up, take them back, and have them on the menu, I guess. Jesus Pujol. And so when we were on these bird hunting trips, the day we were going to come home, I'd give all the game we had to Joe, and then he'd sell it to Leon de Oro or these people in San Francisco. Just, put it in a couple of gunny bags and give it to him. Well, backing up a little bit, there was a game warden, United States game warden. I didn't think I'd ever forget his name. Who found out, well, backing up a little bit further, my dad, at this point now, was selling vitamins, and he went down there with me 2 or 3 times to Mexico after I started doing it with my rigs and so on. We took a lot of photographs. And some of his customers up in Bakersfield and so on, that he was selling vitamins to, were also duck hunters. So he'd show them photographs of all this stuff we were doing down there. And they hated that.
I bet.
And they went, Bud Elder was the game warden's name. So he showed it to his customers at drugstores. And they didn't like it, so they got a hold of Fish and Game. So every time I would come across the border from Mexico to go through customs, every time Bud Elder was waiting for me. Every time. If I got to know him, hi, Bud.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, it's all yours. And he'd climb into the back. I got the 2 Chesapeakes in there. I'd have to hold them, and I didn't eat him alive. And he'd time after time after time. Well, okay, see you next time. I thought he'd give up. One time, we're coming back, get to the border, same routine, here comes Bud. I open the back for him, he climbs in. He said, what's in this sack? I said, I don't know, waders probably. He said, waders with feathers? I'd forgotten to give the birds to Joe down there.
Mm-hmm.
And he grabbed that sack of, there were ducks and quail and everything, and drug it out in the parking lot, emptied it all over, making a big show of it, and wrote us up. I had to go back to the town of Imperial before a judge, and this goes way back again. He fined me $300, but I'm making it.
I'll tell you, we got to talk about one more of your big loves we haven't talked about yet, which is fishing. I want to talk about fishing. When did you get into, I mean, really serious fishing where you were traveling to do it and making a lot of time to do it. Tell us about that.
Well, I'd read about, let me just think. When I had my wholesale company, we also sold a series of softcover books called Digest, Fishing Digest, Hunting Digest, Archery Digest. And one of them was about fishing, and I was looking through it one day. And it showed a guy by the name of Dick Kotis, Kotis, who was the president of Fred Arbogast, who was a big manufacturer of artificial lures, bass plugs and so on. And he was in Costa Rica fishing for tarpon out in the ocean. And I'd never even seen a tarpon. And I thought, God, I wonder why I couldn't do that with a big long streamer. So I did. I went, there was a place called Paris-Mina, P-A-R-I-S, Paris-Mina. It was a river that flowed into the Atlantic, which is where the tarpon were. And on the Pacific, it was where the billfish were. And I pioneered, a guy in San Francisco and also one in Anaheim. We pioneered fly fishing for these monster big fish. I mean, fish that were, like some of those tarpon were close to 200 pounds.
Because they weren't fly fishing. You guys started. You guys started doing that. But before you, people weren't doing it.
Nobody was doing that.
Yeah.
And it was just a hair that I got.
Yeah.
And I had this is before graphite rods, all fiberglass. And so I went to Paris-Mina, and it's different than most tarpon fishing in that the Paris-Mina River ran right next to camp. And then there was a bar that had built up over time, dirt coming out, and it built a bar there, and then out into the ocean. And the wind there was almost always onshore, blowing in your face, and that combined with the current made that bar water really rough. And they had tiny small boats in those days, little John boats, flat bottom. And the sharks were conditioned that when the tides were right, they could get up onto that bar and eat these tarpon as they came. And so on a windy day, you didn't dare try and cross that bar in these little boats.
Yeah.
But anyway, you'd get outside in the ocean, find a school of those, and fly and so on. But what happened is, I'm fighting a tarpon. Tarpon are real game fish, jump all over the place. I'm fighting them, really fighting them, and trying to tire them out. And all of a sudden, they would slow down. And you think, okay, now I got it. And then they speed up. And what they're speeding up is the sharks can sense when they're wearing out, the big fish. And 2 or 3 times I brought in a half a tarpon, just like a cleaver.
Wow.
About that long instead of that long. And so I finally figured there that I was going to just let them jump 2 or 3 times, then just tighten up and break them off, so I wouldn't eat them. I could tell you a lot of stories about tarpon fish. I hooked in Belize. I used to go to Belize a lot. I hooked a tarpon at exactly 6:30 in the morning. Now this is what we called, I'll back up. I go to fish, I don't go to drink or horse around. And to fish tarpons, you can't really, it's sight fishing. You don't blind cast. You never cast unless you see a fish. Sometimes you can go a long time without cast. But there was what we call a flat, which is just shallow water. And it had 3 cuts going through it of deep water. And occasionally, we would pull across the flat. Bonefish were all over the place. And here I was going for tarpon. We pull across to this first cut, stick the pole in the mud. The guide would stick the pole in the mud and look down and see if we could see any tarpon rolling. Once in a while we did. And this last day, my son had come down to surprise me on one birthday. He was in a boat with us. And there were nothing in the first 2 cuts. Went motored across, poled across to the last cut, nothing. Except I looked, wait. I said, Rommel, my guide, leave the pole there. I think I saw something. Way, way down there, I saw a single fish just come up and roll like that. And I pointed it out to Rommel, and the fish was coming our way. And that cut was probably 100 feet wide, just a little longer than you can make a Hail Mary cast. And he kept coming and kept coming, but he was kind of hugging that opposite bank. And, I mean, you know, all we'd see is the fish roll. And so he got to the point where this is the flat across, this is the cut, this is where that. If I didn't cast pretty soon, he was going to be getting farther and farther away.
Yep.
So he got as close as I thought he was ever going to get. And I let off just what I call a Hail Mary cast. Didn't think I had a chance. And I'm stripping it. All of a sudden, it's like I hooked a log or something. And it was that fish. I fought that fish for 6 hours and 20 minutes. I hooked him at exactly 6:30 and had him to the boat at 12:40.
Wow.
6 hours and 10 minutes.
That's incredible.
Never sat down once. It was one of those I never would do. It was one of those rare days when there were no clouds and very little wind. We looked at the nautical charts that night, and that fish had taken us from where we were to the mainland, back to the set of keys, back 22 miles in over 6 hours. And in those days, there were no scales that you could operate from a skiff. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to claim a world record, which I didn't care. I've released so many world records. But you had to kill the fish. Just let it die and then go like hell, losing weight. All the time you're going to a certified scale. But there was a formula. It was the length of the fish times the girth times something else. And it was pretty accurate. And that fish, according to that, would have weighed 212 pounds. Now it may have been 180, may have been, 220, I don't know. It was a big fish. And I went to Belize 7 times 1 year because I found a place there where the tarpon fishing was just out of this world and nobody knew about it. But I knew it would be discovered and overfished and ruined. But I didn't pioneer the tarpon fishing. A guy named in Key West, by the name of Stu Apt, did that. But what I did pioneer was taking billfish, sailfish, and marlin. And I could bore you to death, Nick, with stories about how I did that. But when I quit, I had taken 138 Pacific sailfish on a fly.
If you could go fish anywhere in the world, where would you go?
Now?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I don't know. You know, I loved it all. I mean, I fished Labrador for
Wow.
for big brook trout. You know, brook trout you think are about like that. 8 and 9 pound brook trout. I fished all over British Columbia for steelhead. I have fished Venezuela, which is in the headlines lately,
Yep.
for bonefish, a place called Los Roques. And then Panama, I fished the West Coast, pardon me, for billfish. And, pardon me, and Costa Rica, both coasts. The West Coast were billfish, the East Coast were tarpon. And then Belize, as I say. You know, I was everywhere.
Winston, we're about at time here. I have one more question for you, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry.
Like I said, I have one more question. We're about at time.
Whatever.
What are you most proud of in your life?
Oh, God. I think probably what we've done in this valley. I probably mentioned earlier, we built just over 100 buildings that we owned. We're not general contractors. Built the buildings, leased them, held them for a period of time, ultimately sold them. We don't own any real estate right now, except our homes.
Mm-hmm.
We sold everything. 3 million square feet. And obviously we had a lot of competition, other people doing the same thing. But they were taking quality out of the buildings so their cost would be less, and so they could be more competitive. I did just the opposite, you know, naive or otherwise. We put more into those buildings. Our buildings were quality, and the people that could afford our rents, because our costs were higher, rents had to be higher, were quality tenants, you know, big name, national tenants. Like in the, I don't know if you know where Kohl's is on Eagle Road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hobby Lobby,
Mm-hmm.
that was mine.
Mm-hmm.
That was 87 acres of sugar beets and potatoes and onions when I bought it.
Yeah.
And this one right here was also sugar beets. Call this El Dorado. I guess I never think of it in terms of being proud, but it's hard to drive almost any place in the valley. And Jeff, my son, and I decided we didn't want to leave town, you know, start an operation in Utah or something.
You certainly could have.
Yeah,
If I wanted to.
we could have, but I had at one time with Kamloops, I had over 150 employees. With the commercial real estate, didn't have very many employees. Had 2 marketing people. We didn't use brokers to get our stuff leased, because a broker has an obligation to a bunch of clients.
That's right.
So if they get space for leased, they're going to show it to all those clients. They don't care where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
If it's my building, I want somebody to focus on my building.
That's
so
right.
we had 2 marketing people in here, and we were busy. So I guess to try and answer your question, what we've accomplished in commercial real estate, we can be pretty proud of.
Absolutely. That's all I have for you.
Okay.
I appreciate your time.
Oh, come on.
Thank you for being willing to share.